Hi, hello. Welcome to another episode of Man with a Mentor. I am the man, your host, Matthew Barnard, and you may be wondering what a show called Man with a Mentor may be about. And basically, it's about me finding people who have an interesting career, and it's all the things that led up to the successful place where they are right now. And I have a guy who is successful and super interesting, and you'll see why as we discuss things. And his name is David Nilsen. Welcome, David.
Thank you for having me on the show, Matt.
You're welcome. I'm going to read a blurb about you.
All right.
David Nilsen is a full-time food and beverage writer and educator focused on craft beer, host of the Bean to Barstool podcast, and author of Pairing Beer and Chocolate. And all his information can be found at davidnilsenbeer.com.
Yeah. So, we've got the book behind us here. So
we do. All right. We're going to get to that later. Let's talk about right now. Like, what does a typical day look like for David? Are you traveling? Are you doing lectures? Are you writing, doing podcasts? Like, take me through it.
So I am a freelancer. I work for myself, which means that very few days are the same, one after the other, because of all of the different projects that I have going on. And as you pointed out, I'm both a writer and an educator. So part of my career is speaking, leading public tasting events, leading educational classes, doing staff training at breweries. The other part of it is sitting at my desk writing. And even with that, you've got interviews to conduct and research to do. And depending on what an article is about, it might require traveling to a location to either take photography or to conduct interviews to learn about what you're writing about. So day to day can be pretty different for me. So what I generally try to do is kind of orient my week around the different types of tasks I have and group things together so I can spend extended periods of time at my desk writing when I need to do that. If I have interviews to do, maybe throw those onto the same day. So I'm doing 5 or 6 interviews in one day, and that's most of my day. As a confirmed introvert, I don't love getting on the phone, I don't love having to do that with my entire day. So I find that throwing them all onto the same day, it's like, all right, you got to buckle up today. I'm going to do all these interviews that are going to drain energy, and then tomorrow is a day for writing or whatever it might be. So my average week includes a lot of variety in terms of what types of things I'm doing.
Let's go back and find out, like, when did things hit you that you wanted to pursue finding out about, like, beer and chocolate and other things, or like, how did it come to you?
Yeah, it was kind of an unusual winding path that led to this. As I said, I had other jobs and a whole other career before this. I came to this about 10 years ago. I'm in my early 40s, so had over a decade of employment before I got to this. I left college early, did not complete my degree, so it floated around between a few different jobs. Worked in hospitality at a restaurant, worked at a bank in IT for almost a decade, was a librarian for a while. And while none of those ultimately proved to be something I wanted to do long term, I feel like I did collect things from each of those, both often learning the things that you don't enjoy and the things that grate on you or strip energy from you, I think can be as valuable as learning the opposite, the positive. The emphasis is always on learning what you like, but sometimes you do that by learning what you don't.
Right.
And
no, that's true.
So the last job I was in before I left to freelance, I was working at a library and enjoyed parts of the job, didn't enjoy others, and got to the point where it was time for me to move on to something else. And I was fortunate at that point to be in a position where my wife's job was able to support us. So I was able to take a little bit of time and intentionality around, like, all right, am I just going to bounce around job to job the rest of my life? Or am I going to find a thing that I can actually put energy and that actually adds something to my life rather than being a thing I just have to do to make money. And I've always been writing. I started writing as a child and have always enjoyed that. So just as a hobby, creative writing stories, creative nonfiction, poetry, whatever it is, has always been there as a sideline. And this was about 2016, coincided with a growing interest in artisan food and beverage, just as a personal interest, something I enjoyed, and specifically craft beer. So when we would drink craft beer, we would go to breweries. This is when the real explosion in American craft beer was around 2012, when you started just getting this mushrooming of breweries opening up all over the place. So the last few years we had been traveling and just kind of enjoying ourselves with that as a hobby. And I am a type of person who, when I acquire a new interest, I want to learn everything I can about it. I know some people are a little bit more experiential, where they want to be surprised by things and have these experiences. I want to understand the gears behind it and how it works. So the point at which this went from being just, sure, I like drinking beer, to something that was going to be a career was the point at which I had sort of the aha moment that you were alluding to a little bit ago when you were talking about maybe not recognizing the science behind it, is when I realized just how much goes into this from a scientific standpoint, an agricultural standpoint, historically, national traditions, flavor science, sensory science, like all these different things. And I found it fascinating, started diving in. And so those two rivers kind of converged when I was leaving this last job of, well, I really like beer and I know a lot about it now.
Right.
And I really like writing. And so maybe I can try to make a go of this. And I also had some speaking experience, and so started leading tastings, and then just kind of started cobbling together a career from there, basically assembling the pieces into what I could do full time.
I did want to ask about the different sensibilities of Europe versus the United States, and they even have a beer culture in Japan, and it's almost worldwide. I can't imagine there is a culture that's like, what's beer?
No,
So like, what would you say are the primary differences in terms of what people are into, what people like, why people like a particular thing in one place and not in another? Is it cultural? Is it what's available? Or
all of the above. So most of our beer culture, as we just think of beer commercially, is very Eurocentric. So most of the styles that we're familiar with, in fact, pretty much all of them, can at least trace back to European brewing traditions in the last couple centuries. So countries like Germany, Belgium, Great Britain, Ireland, Czechia. But one of the things that often gets missed with that is that most cultures in the world have been fermenting alcohol for a long time. And often that has been grain-based, starch-based. And so there are brewing traditions that have resulted in beers that we as North Americans would hardly recognize as beer, because they grew in isolation. You have South American styles that were developed by indigenous peoples brewing with corn or other starches. You have Himalayan rice beers. You have all these different African home brewing traditions with grains that we don't even really have available here, like teff and fonio and like these different things. And unfortunately, most of the story of beer has been very Eurocentric. It has been very white-centric. And the actual brewing world, the actual traditions themselves are multicultural. They are wildly diverse. They are as diverse as the cultures themselves and the peoples themselves. And so most of the beers we have today, yes, are Eurocentric, but I think it is important to remember that there are things at the fringes that have not gotten a spotlight that are just as interesting and just as worthy of attention.
Gotcha.
Most of the beer that the average consumer is aware of is some variation of like one style, like light lager, pale lager. And that even is an immigration story tracing back to German and what would now be Chechen immigrants, Bohemian immigrants in the mid 19th century, bringing over their pale lager brewing traditions. And those have become dominant and mass produced. And so in most cultures around the world, even if they have a rich brewing tradition, the best selling beer is probably pale lager. But when you look behind that into the more artisan, esoteric reaches of their cultures, you have varied appreciation for beer in a growing number of countries. So there's a lot of places we don't think of as craft beer destinations that actually have really fascinating cultures around that right now. Brazil, Italy, Japan, places that are not the first countries you think of for beer.
Right.
Amazing destinations for that now.
Right. Let's talk about writing. So let's talk about both of these. The pairing beer and chocolate. Like I said, those are two things that I think almost all humans love. But honestly, I hadn't actually thought of eating those two things together. You know what I mean? Like I thought of like a delicious dessert wine or something with a chocolatey dessert or something. Like that seems like, shishi. But I hadn't actually thought of this combination. And does it work? It
does.
Yeah.
Now,
Okay.
I will say it works, except when it doesn't. And that's the thing with any kind of pairing. You're not judging it on the things that don't work. You're judging it on the things that do. And I think one of the things that has kept people from thinking about beer and chocolate, aside from the fact that wine has been remarkably well marketed as sort of that fine, refined, romantic thing that can pair with cheese and chocolate and different things, is that beer has some potential flavor attributes that can clash with a lot of chocolates. And so if somebody just opens a random beer and has a random chocolate, that pairing might not be good. And so they think, oh man, beer and chocolate don't pair together.
Right.
What you need is a little bit of guidance to find the things that do work. And then
I think you need a lot of guidance.
You have these magical moments of like, oh my God. So when I'm leading pairings publicly, inevitably there is somebody there who arrived skeptical. Right. And then they have that moment of like, I had no idea these flavors could be present and that these could work together in this way.
Let's talk about Final Gravity, and we'll talk about pairing beer and chocolate and where people can find both these publications or subscribe, or is it available online? Like, can you order it, or how does it work?
So, so my wife, Melinda Guerra, and I run a small publishing company called Bean to Barstool that also has a podcast component to it. Our primary publication out of that, though we have a number of zines and things, is our periodical Final Gravity. Final Gravity is a brewing term. It refers to, it's kind of esoteric. It's the amount of sugar that is remaining in the beer at the end of fermentation. That's your final gravity reading. But it also sounds really cool, right? Final
it does,
gravity.
yeah.
So we went with that as our name. But what's unique about Final Gravity is that it is focused around people. It is very personal and human-centered and culturally centered, and looking at cultural intersections and the fact that the people who work in and around beer are people who do other things that don't have anything to do with beer, and those are stories worth telling. And so where a lot of drinks publications are focused, and maybe very good publications, but are focused on technical aspects, whether it's how to homebrew, or here's the history of this style, or whatever it might be, we're focused on the brewery owner who does roller derby to let her stress out, and her telling her story about that, or a beer writer who is hard of hearing and was having a lot of trouble in beer spaces because you go into tap rooms and it's just noise and flat surfaces and everything's echoing around. And so he interviewed breweries who are working to make their spaces more sensory friendly for people who are hard of hearing, and just all sorts of different stories that don't get published anywhere else. And they touch on beer, but that may not be the main focus. It's about the person and the connections between people. So we are telling those kinds of stories. And Final Gravity comes out quarterly. And you can order both the book and Final Gravity or subscribe to Final Gravity on beantobarstool.com, which is our publishing website. We've got a shop on there with zines and books and whatnot. And then also have a Patreon, and you can get to all that
Who
from
do
the
you
site.
talk to on the podcast?
So the podcast actually preceded both of these. I started the podcast during the pandemic like everybody else, and it came from having had these parallel interests in craft beer and craft chocolate, starting to do pairing, but also starting to recognize really interesting parallels between these two artisan fields, even though seemingly they have nothing to do with each other. Having a strong familiarity with beer and then getting into chocolate, realizing like, oh, you guys are having the same kind of arguments around how terms get used, or you're having the same kind of tensions between big and small companies, or all these different things that were overlapping. And so I started the podcast to explore all those intersections. And so the whole idea behind the Bean to Barstool podcast was, what are all of the different intersections between craft chocolate and artisan alcoholic drinks? Started out with craft beer, but we've gone beyond that to look at others now. And so we talk about pairing, we talk about producers who are working with ingredients from the other side, so breweries who are working with cacao nibs, which is what chocolate's made from, or chocolate makers who are infusing their chocolate with whiskey or wine, or barrel aging their cocoa beans, or different, looking at all these different intersections, looking at people who have familiarity with both worlds, and asking them, what do you see what these have in common? What can they learn from each other? That kind of thing. And so that's what I've been doing on there for 5 years now. And from that came the publishing side of the business.
You're a beer expert, but if someone said to you, would you like to start a brewery with me, would you be like, oh, not so much? Or would you love that? Or
I would be very unlikely to follow that path. For one thing, unfortunately, the beer industry is struggling a little bit right now. Some of that is politically related, but honestly, a lot of it is just market related. The wave of popularity for craft beer crested shortly before the pandemic started. So like 2018 or 19 was kind of peak craft beer. And then you started to get a little bit more market headwind. There's a lot of hand wringing and arguing about what exactly went into all that. But then you got the pandemic. So suddenly these are hospitality businesses that are now in a hard place.
Yeah.
So just from a purely strategic economic standpoint, opening a brewery is a hair-raising endeavor right now. So if for no other reason, that would give me pause. But just from a standpoint of professional interest, I enjoy getting to operate within the beer ecosystem, but kind of be an observer and be able to appreciate what a lot of different people are doing and tell those stories. And so I get to tell a lot of different stories and be a part of those stories by telling them. Right. Whereas most of the brewers I know, or brewery owners I know, rarely drink anything but their own beer because they're just there at their own brewery all day, and their noses are down, and their heads are down, their noses are in their work, and they're just you don't get to be that fan as much anymore. You have to take opportunities for that, whereas that is my career, is getting to be able to bounce around to these different things and meet different people and go different places and tell different stories. So it's not a hard no. Sure, maybe at some point somebody comes up with an idea and there's a creative way for me to be a part of it, and that sounds appealing, but it's not. It's a lot of people's dream within beer. It has never been mine to own my own brewery. I like getting to watch. I like getting to just be able to observe.
Let's talk social media. How do people find you? I mentioned davidnilsenbeer.com.
Yeah.
Is that where everything is?
Yeah, so you can get to everything from there. I am also David Nilsen Beer on Instagram and Blue Sky. Right. And then beantobarstool.com, which is linked from my website. So if you go there, you can get to Bean to Barstool. But beantobarstool.com has the podcast, has the shop for the book and the zines. and then it has its own associated social media accounts with it. I did not explain earlier, if anybody is wondering what the name Bean to Bar Stool means. So the term bean to bar is one of the terms that gets used to describe craft chocolate. Chocolate is being made all the way from the cocoa bean to the finished bar by one maker, whereas most of the big national or international companies they have no idea where their beans are coming from. It's getting processed for them, and then they're just making finished chocolate at the end. So bean to bar became this term that was kind of like saying craft beer. You would say bean to bar chocolate. There's some reasons the term doesn't have as much credence now, but when I was creating the show with the idea of chocolate and alcoholic beverages, bean to bar stool kind of made a nice little portmanteau of bringing those together. That's what if you're wondering what on earth that term meant.
Right. I wasn't, but now I'm learning new things that I didn't even know I maybe should or shouldn't have asked about.
Always ask.
Now, you've done a book, Pairing Beer and Chocolate. Would you ever do a book pairing beer and fill in the blank? What would that be?
I would be interested in it, but a lot of those books have been written. So you have wonderful books written by other professionals about pairing beer and cheese, or pairing broadly with food, different cuisines and things like that. So those are very worthwhile topics, but they have been covered, and this is the only book in existence on pairing beer and chocolate. So that's kind of a niche that I've carved out for myself, and why I wrote this, and I'm hoping to expand this into a bigger edition next year, so a second edition of the book.
Right.
What
would be something unusual that you could pair with beer that hasn't been written about?
One thing that we're seeing, and this is interesting, I actually got interviewed by a colleague for a story she was writing a couple months back about the change in the beer dinner. We used to see a lot of beer dinners that breweries would host, and we don't see as many just kind of like, come and let us pair 5 courses for you type of things anymore. What we are seeing a lot of places do is pair more experientially rather than the classic, here's a drink, here's a dish, pairing with things like music. I've been to a couple of events and seeing other places do it where they will serve beer in like half an hour shifts, and during that time a DJ will be doing a particular type of music that he or she has thought of because of this beer, and like doing things like that. You see pairings of come and have beer, and we're going to show you how to put together your own terrarium with plants. And so we're seeing a lot of interesting experiential pairing. Experiences are what is driving hospitality right now, especially in the beer space. It's not enough to just put up 4 walls and brew beer and people will show up. It's got to be a place that people want to come and do something at. So breweries are getting creative with the type of experiences that they offer, and book clubs and sewing clubs and all sorts of unusual things. And so pairings around that are pretty interesting, and the sky's the limit.
I think a sewing club, I think you might get a hem that's like jiggy jack. They've had too much beer. It might be like, what happened here? All right, David Nilsen. I'm going to remind people to go to davidnilsenbeer.com, and I want to thank you for being my guest and talking about the world of craft beer and everything else that you're involved with.
Well, Matt, thank you for having me on.
You're welcome. Thank you. I want to thank you for watching and listening to Man with a Mentor. Feel free to share and let everybody know the fun things that we're talking about here on Man with a Mentor. And this is David Nilsen. This is Matthew Barnard. Thank you for watching.
Cheers.
Bye.